questionnaires and then to write a piece about it. So.
Oh, that's cool.
All right, folks, give us one more minute. We're going to get things underway. We got a lot of folks joining us right now. Give us one more minute.
You said to wait 5 minutes because a lot of people are signing up at the last minute.
Oh, wow.
377 RSVP, she said.
I want to direct everybody's attention to the chat going on right now. A lot of activity, a lot of integral folks who have played a key role for AAJA through the years, and you can say hi to them. Great to see everybody out there. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. This is so exciting to be talking to everybody out there. And as I mentioned earlier in the chat, you can see so many huge names for AAJA, folks who have contributed so much to this conversation. There are hundreds of people joining us today. This is going to be a wonderful conversation with our AAJA founders. Thank you all for joining us. My name is David Ono. I'm coming to you from our newsroom here at KBC in Los Angeles. But I think what you'll see in the chat is folks from all over the country and probably even the world, but all over the country, at least from both coasts, are joining us right now. And I want to say hello to everybody on the East Coast, West Coast, and all around. Thanks for being here. I've been a member of AAJA since the early 90s, and it has been so important to me in my career, my life, and establishing some of my closest friendships. I think a lot of you folks out there can do feel the same and would say the same thing. So for 40 years now, that's amazing. A span for a group that started in Los Angeles living rooms. It was seemingly a blink ago. You're going to meet these people. Our proud membership is now 1,700 across the globe, 20 chapters. We're grateful to all of you. And we want to hear from you as well. As you'll notice at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A button. So throughout the conversation today, we'd love for you to ask some questions as well. So as we get towards the end of this program, we'll ask some of your questions. But we're going to take you through from beginning to today and all that has transpired with this organization and getting it started, getting it underway under the most difficult of times. So to get things started, as with all excellent journalism, we all may need a little context on the difficult ground in which AAJA took root. So let's hear about this from AAJA LA board members, Vicki Nguyen of Spectrum News and Jeremy Chen of KTNV. No audio. We don't have audio.
Yeah, me too. I don't have no audio.
Thank you, David. It's our pleasure
There you
to
go.
take us back in time so we all understand history's invaluable lessons.
We all have seen that regrettable parts of the past can live on, and since our arrival on America's shores, people of Asian descent all too often have been mistreated and made to feel unwelcome.
We may have thought we had escaped this painful history when Vincent Chin gets beaten to death in Detroit, or a madman in Stockton, California murders 5 children and wounds 29 at a school heavily attended by Southeast Asians. We say never again, but heinous killings in Atlanta tell us otherwise. The Stop AAPI Hate Project, based at San Francisco State University, says that it has received nearly 4,000 reports of anti-Asian hate incidents in the year or so of the coronavirus pandemic.
AAJA has condemned this racism, and our members have strived professionally to keep a public spotlight on hateful behaviors. This included a national forum by AAJA Los Angeles almost exactly a year ago today.
In that session, Professor Russell M. Jung of San Francisco State reminded us of the history of terrible abuses inflicted against Asian Americans for more than a century and a half.
We have endured discriminatory immigration laws targeting us. We have been demonized and stereotyped as the yellow peril, as the untrustworthy and scheming, or the buck-toothed and servile. We were the neutered and inscrutable Charlie Chans, or the sketchy seductresses in kimono, Chi Pao, or Chung Sam. We were brutalized in mass killings, in an 1871 lynching spree in Los Angeles, and an 1885 massacre in Wyoming. We too often were uprooted and unjustly removed and relocated from our homes. When others coveted the land we made rich or communities we built, We have wrongly been incarcerated, most notably in World War II, in one of the gravest constitutional violations in U.S. history. We may leave other nations and be gone for decades, but we find ourselves perpetually in the middle of U.S. foreign policy controversies and conflict.
Our people toiled in the fields and sweatshops. We shed our blood and gave our lives for our country. Still, for our Asian American ancestors, progress came slowly and with a huge toll. For decades, two questions also went largely unanswered. Would Asian Americans have a voice of their own? And would they have a say about how they were portrayed to themselves and to the world around them?
The answers are yes, and the 60s and 70s laid much of the groundwork for that. Like everyone else in America, we experienced the tumult and transformation of those decades. Our families were riven by the Vietnam War and by the historic unrest of the time, which included the assassinations of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., President Kennedy, and Senator Robert Kennedy. During the Civil Rights Movement, Asian Americans marched with fellow Black, brown, and white Americans to demand racial justice.
The 1965 Immigration Act upended the demographics of our group. Until this time, we were mostly of Chinese and Japanese descent. The lifting of national origin quotas, combined with global incursions of the American superpower, meant that the numbers would spike for Koreans, Southeast Asians, like the Vietnamese, Filipinos, Cambodians, Laotians, Thais, and South Asians, diasporans from the Indian subcontinent. Later, the United States would experience surges of not only ethnic Chinese from familiar areas in southern China, but also Hong Kong, the rest of the mainland, and from Taiwan.
In the 60s, Asian Americans sought advanced education as never before. This led them to witness and act on long-standing inequities. Student activism burgeoned on campuses including UC Berkeley, San Francisco State, and UCLA. Along with taking part in demonstrations, strikes, and sometimes violent confrontations, Asian Americans researched, wrote, and put out to the world a new, different, and distinctive take about their histories and lives. Yuji Ichioka, later a founder of UCLA's Asian American Studies program, is credited with the first use in 1968 of the very term Asian American. Ichioka and his wife Emma G. founded the Asian American Political Alliance. It was the first of its kind, uniting Chinese, Korean, Japanese, and Filipino Americans, among others of Asian ancestry, to fight for political and social action together, UCLA noted recently.
The issues that galvanized Asian Americans and forced them to think deeply about their role in American society included the push for redress and reparations by Japanese Americans for the ugly forced relocation and incarceration of their community during World War II. Asian Americans also rallied to oppose injustices in the gentrification of San Francisco, notably battling over the landmark International Hotel. In Los Angeles, activists inspired by the investigative reporting of K.W. Lee fought the wrongful homicide conviction of Chol Soo Lee. In Westwood, Asian Americans battled to support the tenure campaigns of two prominent ethnic studies professors, Ronald Takaki and Don Nakanishi.
The 60s and 70s were also a time for creative Asian Americans to flourish and fight stereotypes. In 1965, activists in Los Angeles established East West Players, the nation's first professional theatrical organization for Asian Americans. It allowed them to perform in roles beyond the stereotypes that Hollywood and Broadway sought to keep them in. In 1970, pioneering Asian Pacific film, video, photography, and media practitioners and educators launched Visual Communications to develop and support AAPI voices, empower communities, and challenge perspectives.
In the news media, our communities have long been served by the so-called ethnic press and publications like AmerAsia Journal, Gerda, and Bridge. But as Asian American communities exploded after World War II in size, importance, and challenges, there came a need for mainstream media to better cover them too. To their credit, news organizations like Times Mirror and Los Angeles Times and Gannett saw the future. They and other industry leaders began to push for more diverse and inclusive newsrooms to improve coverage of communities of color. This was especially true after a U.S. commission, after rioting in the 60s, ripped the media in the Kerner Report for their failures to adequately report on Black and other communities of color. News organizations were assailed for lacking the representative staff to do so.
AAJA was not the first group of its kind. We were preceded by the National Association of Black Journalists and the California Chicano News Media Association, which later helped found the National Association of Hispanic Journalists. The New York-based Asian Americans for Fair Media raised concerns about bigoted stereotyping and misinformation about our people in the 1970s. In California, Bill Wong, a pioneering Oakland Tribune journalist, wrote and spoke out early and often about the need for improved media coverage of the Asian American community. He founded Asians in Mass Media to press for more equitable and accurate portrayals of the community. They inspired, well, what then were some relative newcomers to the business. David, that's our cue for you and our distinguished guests this evening to take it from here.
All right, Vicki and Jeremy, thank you so much for that. That was a great look back and look at the history of not only AAJA, but the times that folks have been dealing with. By the way, Joe Pan from Hong Kong has checked in the chat, so we are now international. We have folks from all over the world joining us today. And here's our opportunity to really get down to it and talk to some fantastic people. We have with us Bill Singh, Nancy Yoshihara, David Kishiyama, all from the Los Angeles Times. We have Frank Kwan, then from NBC or NBC4, Dwight Chuman, who is with the Rafu Shimpo. And of course, we have to mention Trisha Toyota. A lot of love goes out to her, formerly with KMBC and KCBS, one of the founders as well. She was not able to be with us today, but we will certainly be talking to her. But I want to kick off the conversation with Bill. Bill, you wanted to kind of start with a thank you. What is that?
Yeah, first of all, hi, everyone. I'm so glad to see all of you here. On behalf of the founders, I would like to thank all of you, the AAJ National and Chapter Presidents, the staff, the volunteers, board members and regular members, supporters, funders, and others who took AAJ from what we started in LA to the point now where we could celebrate the 40th anniversary. This commemoration is as much a salute to you as it is to us. And I particularly want to express my deepest gratitude to Lloyd LaCosta and Diane Wong, who we passed the baton off to after the first national convention in 1987. The transition from the founders to the next leaders is often a crucial step for any organization. And you both did a fantastic job of taking the baton and running with it. And now you have such a fantastic organization. And I think we're all so proud of what everyone here has done to make AAJ such a wonderful, outstanding organization.
We are also proud, Bill. Great to hear from you, and wonderful that you recognize all the hard work for so many people. And a lot of the folks that you mentioned and we are mentioning are with us today as well. I want to start things off by showing everybody a photo. And we have a number of these nostalgic photos that we want to kind of whet your appetite with. But pop up our first photo there and look at this. This is one of the first events. You notice Trisha is in a couple of them as well. And I want to bring in Frank Kwan, who has a little bit to say about Trisha Toyota and her role, as well as what's going on in these photos.
Well, this is actually the first dinner that we had. It made us really official. I think initially we started off with the reception, and we just invited people that we saw in the credits roll by and says, is that an Asian name? Invite that person, kind of thing. And we were just astounded when like 40 or 50 people showed up, and we just had no idea. But the next big step for us was to do a big dinner, because in Los Angeles at the time, you weren't really an organization until you put on an event like this. And so everybody put all of the stops out, particularly Trisha. And there is not enough credit that can go to Trisha for what she did, how she went about it. She was truly the driving force. She kind of pulled the rest of us along with her. But really, you know, this is the thing that she pulled together. And this is a great dinner. She was the one who helped get Tom Brokaw. And we had Al Newhart there. So we had a lot of big names come in for this. but particularly Tricia, again, you know, used the strength of her personality to make this event happen. And I also know, as we sat around in that little photo there on your upper left-hand side, I think, there are three of us sitting there, Tricia, Bill, and I, and we knew what it took. We need to have community support. So we said, listen, we got to get all these organizations to attend our dinner because it would give us some legitimacy. And the thing is, what happens is that the organization would say, yes, you know, we will come to your dinner. However, our dinner is coming up in 3 months, 6 months, et cetera. So Tricia, would you mind emceeing that dinner? Or Frank, would you mind emceeing that dinner? So for the following year, Tricia and I were really busy paying off all of those groups who came to our dinner because we did their dinners. But truly, this marked a real fundamental foundational starting point for the organization, because it truly gave us legitimacy, it gave us visibility, and it gave us the ability to begin to start raising some funds. And at this point, I want to make sure I credit Yet Locke. Yet was a vice president at City News Service, and truly should have been one of the founders, because Yet's role in the organization and how he helped us get started and keep going, really just, it can't be understated either. But we had one heck of a time trying to do this dinner. As anybody has to put on a dinner knows, these are all working journalists. At the same time, we had to pull together this big whoopie-doo dinner. But again, it was a success. People counted it as a success because they got up before 10 p.m. and they said, great, do this again, because we love that. Yeah. But there a lot of hard work went into this dinner.
Oh, I bet. And I think a lot of us can relate to the fact that, yes, this organization, it's wonderful, but it does pull us in multiple directions while we're still holding down jobs. A lot of folks watching today, yeah, can really relate to that. I want to kind of take a step back and talk to each of you about what got you into journalism to begin with. This is before AAJA. What got you here and what was it like? Nancy, I'd love to start with you. What got you to decide to be a journalist as opposed to one of those other classic, quote unquote, Asian jobs? By the way, you're muted.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for holding this commemorative event. It's nice to see all the people showing up at the chat with who I haven't seen in ages. I think for me, I was trying to figure out what I could do or what I like to do and what maybe I could do. And I always like to write. I mean, my essays seem to earn me the right grades, et cetera. So I thought that's what I would do. And so, of course, as an undergrad, I went to UCLA, but they did not have a journalism program. So I majored in English. And then when I graduated, I said, okay, I want to write. And they did have a master's program at UCLA then. And in between that period, which was about, I think, a year or so, I decided I should go look at the LA Times. I grew up reading it. It was just way downtown, right next door practically to Little Tokyo. And I applied. And at that time, I mean, I didn't know any better. Nobody told me I couldn't do anything. So I figured the editorial department and I filed an application. And a few months later, they hired me as a copy messenger. And I think most of you don't even know what a copy messenger is, because back when there was print and printing presses, I mean, I'm not that ancient, but it was within my lifetime that you just ran errands for the newsroom. You know, you would take wire copy off the machine and give it to an editor. You would go to the printer and pull little strips of galleys off of it and bring it to the editor so they could literally edit the copy on it and send it back for the final runs. We used to go, and before there was certainly the internet and messenger services and what have you, we would have a route that would take us to the police stations, the city hall, to all these different places that were then key in delivering news to us, but we had to pick it up. And that's the way I started. And then once I got into journalism school, and midway through, I learned that there was an internship at the Washington Post, and I applied and fortunately got it. And I've just been, in many ways, very, very lucky that certain times where I've decided to do something, that the opportunity was there. And I was lucky enough to be offered it. And then hopefully I did something with it. But I've enjoyed being a journalist. And I miss journalists because they're a very different kind of breed of people to me. I mean, they're curious. You know, they stand up to people. It's just a wonderful group of people. And I miss them now that I'm not part of journalism.
I think we all understand that. Dwight, are you there? And
Yes.
you were with the Rafu. What brought you to journalism?
Oh, well, long story, but coming out of high school, didn't know what to major in. Asians are supposed to major in certain things, and journalism wasn't real high on that list. And so I wandered between anthro and English. Looks like I was going to become a teacher or something like that, but that wasn't doing it for me. So I started hanging around at Ghidra that was mentioned earlier in the slides. And people looked at me funny and said, "Hey, well, who's that guy?" And so I just wanted something to do. And but the energy in that group helped me see, oh, this is something I can do, and it's socially redeemable, and it's maybe change the world. At that time, we thought we could change the world as 20-year-olds, so it was fitting just fine. And what else? Well, Rafu had been advertising for somebody for about 2 years to fill this one position, and that same ad was there for that long. And my girlfriend at the time said, "You should apply for that job. You'll get it probably for sure. They're looking for somebody." So I did, got in there, and yeah, that was the start of it. It was elevated to editor with the retirement of Ellen Endo at that time. Not retirement, but she actually went to Hollywood to start making TV shows. And yeah, I fell in love with it to a certain point. And the point was the thing was to spend about 10 years there and then see what happens with a career and branching out. It looked like it was going to be broadcasting. So I worked at KCT, and we went from there. And I always wanted to publish my own magazine, whether it was a surfing magazine or a car magazine. I wanted to publish a 4-color monthly magazine. And eventually I got that, but it was publishing a gambling magazine in Las Vegas Leisure magazine. And so, I found out my journalistic dream came true, but your dreams aren't always exactly the way you want them. So, I learned that lesson.
Yeah.
But, once you're a news guy, though, and I edited the Rafu for just a few, seems like just 6 months or something like that. But once you get into that atmosphere, putting out a daily newspaper every, 5 days a week, it's not 7 days a week, but 5 days a week, you're forever a journalist. You're forever analyze the news from a journalist's point of view, and it's addictive. You can never drop it. I'm sure that some of you who are retired, you're feeling that. You say, "Wow, they're not handling that story exactly right, or they're handling it exactly right." And you can differentiate between the two.
Right.
Okay, cut me off.
David, we're already at 6:35 right now, so I'm going to kind of get to it. David, your background, how did you get into it? But what eventually led up to you guys starting to create AAJA?
Well, thank you again for hosting and for everyone having this event and now attending. I actually got started back in the Stone Age. It was 1961 when I started college and studied journalism. And I was inspired by my mother, who was a columnist for the local papers, as well as the English sections of the 2 statewide Japanese language newspapers. So I started doing her legwork and doing some interviews of the community where she wrote some columns for the local paper as well. And when I started school, I just depended on that as the inspiration. If my mother could do it, well, I certainly could. And from there, I just kept going and expected to enter journalism as a working journalist. But when I graduated, it was Vietnam wartime. So I got my diploma and my draft notice about the same time. but I was one jump ahead and joined the Navy. And so for the next 6 years, I was in the Navy and saw the world. I think that inspired me to always want to be a joiner and to join an organization like AAJA. And I was very flattered when Nancy and Bill came to me at the Times and said, we're thinking about starting something called an Asian American Journalists Association, and would you like to help out? Well, I did, and I'm so thankful that that I was able to contribute. It's been a swell journey, and after 40 years and seeing what AAJ has become, I'm just so proud of what we did.
You should be. And it's fantastic, and we're all reaping the benefits of that. So Bill, what was going on in your newsroom to really motivate you to get this going and saying this needs to be done?
Well, I had had such a great interaction with Nancy and David when I first got to the LA Times. And before that, when I was a student at Stanford, Stanford allowed undergrads to create classes. And so we had created a class on Asian Americans in the media, and we invited Bill Wong and Jan Yanahiro to come down to talk to us. And meeting Bill, I was inspired by what he was doing to try to call attention to stereotyping and racism in coverage of Asian Americans. So the whole idea of trying to start an organization came partly from that. And so when at the LA Times, you know, I got together with Nancy and David, and then we all agreed that we need to get Trisha involved because, you know, she was the person in LA in terms of being an anchor person and being so well respected in the Asian Pacific community. So one day I went to I know she was doing some event at UCLA for UCLA Asian American Studies, and I went up to her and says, "Hey, I'd like to talk to you." And she thought, "Oh, are you a student?" And no, I said, "No, but you know, we're thinking about starting an Asian American journalism organization. Are you interested?" And she said, "Of course, she would love to." And from that's how we took it from there. Frank and Dwight got involved, and we took it from there.
Frank, did you see a glaring need? What was going on in your newsroom to motivate you to be one of the founders?
Well, let me just say that the atmosphere back in not just in the early 80s, but even beforehand, is that there was a true sense of some isolation, simply because there just weren't enough people who looked like us, you know, around the station. And I remember I was producing a show, and I had the ability, I had some staff, I had an associate producer, et cetera, kind of thing. And I do recall very specifically, the program director pulled me aside one day because I was trying to give some entree to Asian Americans getting into television. So I had hired a couple of successive associate producers who were Asian. And he pulled me aside and he says, "You know," he said, "it looks a little weird because there's two Asians here. You're all Asian." And I said, "Yeah, well, there's only two of us." And I said, "Not only that, how come it's okay for the other 5 shows that have nothing but white people on them? What does that mean?" And he went, "Oh yeah, well, yeah, everything's fine. But it's just representative of how the thinking goes." And then the second part of it really was that I was just truly pissed off. I was just pissed off the fact that, you know, we were in a sense marginalized, underrepresented, all that stereotyping that was going on. I mean, I kind of got started with more community stuff because I had actually taken a class, and Dwight knows this person, Bruce Iwasaki Ghidra, and I eventually took over Bruce's class. I taught that class kind of thing, but it opened up my eyes in terms of what we're truly dealing with, particularly in terms of being pigeonholed in society. And so when the opportunity came up, and I had a great associate producer who was a Chinese American woman, and she really helped me out. But the point is that there was such a need to be able to try to, and we didn't even know the word then, but network, so that you felt that your experiences, your hardship, your challenges were not something that you alone faced, but it was something that we could take on in common. And that's where the strength came in, the ability to say, you know what, it's not just me who's going through this. but Nancy's going through stuff. Bill is going through some stuff. Folks are just going through this. And so see if we can pull together and then get some strength from that and some solidarity. And I think, it sounds very activist-like, but that's truly what it took. We actually had to pull together and create this organization. And I think, the fact that it's been around for 40 years obviously shows the need for it still continues.
Right. It can't be understated, though, that to do something like this takes courage. You're sticking your neck out there. You're making yourself a target, open for criticism. Nancy, were you concerned that that criticism could hit you and it would isolate you?
I probably should have thought about that then, but I think overall, the general newsroom, I don't think they necessarily took us seriously. I don't think they necessarily thought that we could organize and pull this together and have a presence and have a say. And so I didn't feel like it threatened my job. I thought that if anything, I think it created a curiosity among our white colleagues as to, what are they up to? And at least it made them curious, but I don't know about accepting, but certainly curious enough to think that you present ourselves in a different dimension of organizing, of being in charge, of running something, of taking something local, national. And, that's impressive in a whole different sense, to hopefully to our colleagues.
Dwight, what do you think was the toughest part of the early days on getting this thing going?
Internally at a ethnic newspaper, it came from the Japanese speaking section at that time. They were kind of aloof to any Japanese Americans. What's that? Is that me?
I don't know.
Anyway, there was a gulf there between not only generations of the staff, but where you got educated. And the guys from Japan, although it wasn't a big deal, I just rammed right through them, but they were very separatist. They disruptive. They would say, "This is the way we do it. We're the real Japanese. You're not really Japanese, and this is the way it's going to be." And I got yelled at a couple of times. And then the people who used to pick type, these ladies used to pick hot type out of these racks. They saw me getting dressed down by an old editor in the Japanese section. He was just screaming at me in Japanese and saying that, I'm arrogant and everything like that. And we had gotten sued because of me. So he was really putting me down. And then after that, there's this protocol that was going on. If you were an editor or if you were holding holding your own as a writer, you would get served tea in the afternoon. And it was a big deal. And I knew that I was getting shined on. They weren't serving me tea. But after that guy yelled at me, and then they judged like, well, what's he doing? Oh, he's doing pretty good in the English section over there. Let's start serving him tea. So I got it, and after that, the smile was really wide. I was thinking, it went to my head too, kind of. But yeah, that was something.
Right. I'd love to put up another photo now and kind of give people a taste of the times back then. Let's see what they have in store for us, because some of these are kind of randomly put together by surprise, so we could see what you guys were up to. And as they're getting that together, that's the first one. Here's the second one. Bill, let's bring you in. This is perfect. Well, where did it go? Oh, we've looked at that one. If we go back to the other one.
Censored. Most photos have been censored.
There you go. There you go. So what are we seeing in this photo, Bill?
Well, the one on the upper left is probably from one of the first conventions, I think. I'm not sure actually where that's from. The one with me lying down was just kind of getting crazy. And the one with me holding probably a wine bottle it had to be celebrating something. I'm not quite sure, but the people in there include Lorena Tong, and Trisha's in there, and Cindy Chow Snavely and Karen Saraguchi. And those were people that were very instrumental in us getting this organization off the ground. Obviously, we had, I would add Elaine Wu to that mix too. You know, it wasn't just the founding six. And those people were just invaluable in getting things off the ground.
Mm. Did you have concerns about starting AAJA? Did you worry that this could hurt your career?
Actually, I thought it'd be more of a risk not to do this. I think it was imperative that we do this. I never thought it would be a risk to my career. In fact, as I said, I thought it'd be more of a risk not doing it. You know, not having, you know, to have passed by an opportunity to create something that would break new ground and create so many opportunities for people. So it was more risky not to do it. And I think David and Nancy and I were fortunate to be working at the LA Times, which at the time was starting to recognize the need to be more diverse. You know, I think AAJ started in LA partly because LA was kind of ground zero for how the nation was becoming more diverse. You know, more immigrants were coming from Asia. You know, LA was seeing more Filipinos, more Koreans, more Vietnamese were coming in and setting up little Saigon. And the people at the LA Times, you know, saw they needed to address the diversity issue, you know, they would have to deal with it. And so they were very receptive to this. I at no point felt any risk at all at the LA Times in doing this. In fact, if anything, we were supported. And Tom Johnson was the publisher at the time. He was very supportive. We all got along with him very well. And, you know, it was a good experience for us to do it. And we got a lot of support from the LA Times. And soon after that, they started the METPRO program, which is one of the first newspapers in the country to start a minority education, a minority training program. And soon after that, other newspapers started doing the same thing.
Okay.
Can
I'm sorry
I just-
about that. Yeah, Frank, I want to real quickly though. I don't know where the feedback is coming from when you guys are not talking. Let's just try to let's mute our mics just in case. I'm not sure what the source is, but Frank, yeah, I know you wanted to add to that. Go right ahead.
You know, not all of us work for such understanding organizations, okay? I mean, we worked in broadcast and we worked for stations that were running advertising for Disney that had characters which were incredibly stereotypic. So at the same time, you're saying these are terrible depictions, this is a terrible movie, and you turn around and you look up at the monitor and we're running spots for that kind of thing. So there was truly a thing is like, you know what? You better not bite that hand that feeds you because again, you know, the LA Times, I think, was truly enlightened, but there are other folks who felt very threatened. So we had to figure out a strategy about how we try to deal with this without getting ourselves fired. And I think one of the things was we created, I don't think you could see this type of thing, but it was like Asian Americans in the media. And basically what we did was we put together a booklet. Bill worked on this, a lot of folks worked on this, and we went to the studios, the movie studios, as well as the broadcasts, and we met with them. And we said, here's a booklet that doesn't beat you up, but tells you how you can cover these communities as a resource, as opposed to something that puts you up against the wall. But there was, at least on the broadcast side, a real risk of doing this.
That's fantastic though. But that helped us all. It helped all Asians and how they're addressed and how they're looked at in the media. David, from what I understand, you had been saying that part of the most difficult part in the early years was recruiting people and trying to get money for the organization. Tell me more about that and how'd you do it?
Well, the recruitment part was very tough. And I think that the idea that management and your peers would look at you a bit strangely if you were trying to get organized from whatever perspective. Well, that was a tough sell back in those days. And I remember getting really flat turndowns from people. We were cold calling from lists we built, trying to get people to become interested. Not to join yet, because we weren't even an organization at that point. We were just trying to get people interested. And it was a tough sell. And then when it came to money, that was something that was probably more difficult than ever because there were already other ethnic organizations, news organizations, well established, and they were asking for money too. And in a sense, when we were asking for money from organizations, we were all trying to go after the same bag of coins. So it was difficult. But I think the main fundraisers were Bill and Tricia, as well as Frank. And somehow or another, we were able to get the money. And I remember a lot of the questions about the money was the source. Would we accept money from non-media companies? The high ground, first of all. And then what about liquor and tobacco, the defense industry, Hollywood, for that matter? It was a difficult go, but somehow getting the seed money from the banquets that were our main source of income from the early start. And Bill and Tricia would actually know more about the funding. But I was just happy to be a part of that, whatever part I could play in the early days of AAJA.
Fantastic. I just see in the chat, Fred Katayama said that GD Park cold called me and got me to join. So cold calling does work sometimes, but you guys had a chore because you're starting from ground zero and you're building from there. And I think at this point, it's good to kind of bring the conversation to the next phase of AAJ, and that is building it up and moving it forward. So you guys did initial groundwork, you met in your living rooms, a handful of people, you got the organization going, but you had to build it from there. So we have some slides we want to start to show people, but AAJA as an organization was subjected to one of its toughest tests early on, where its ideas and its goals were compelling enough to catch fire beyond Los Angeles. I think that was a key test, is were other markets willing to join you in this cause? The answer, of course, as we all know, is an emphatic yes. And as we salute our founders in this forum tonight, we also want to recognize our other pioneers in the business around the country and indeed around the world. And as soon as they learned about AAJA, inspired by the robust sales efforts of Bill and David and Frank and all the others, they wanted to join in. And our colleagues beyond LA launched chapters of their own. And we want to give you a sample here. It happened first in San Francisco. Lloyd LaQuesta, he reminds us of this. And some of these are kind of lengthy, and we'll show these to you a little bit later on and give you other opportunities. And Lloyd, I understand, is with us today. I saw him in the chat. So hello to you out there, Lloyd, our dear old friend. And just to give you some highlights, he said, I had worked with Tricia Toyota at KNX CBS Radio. I had attended the UCLA Graduate School of Journalism with David Kishiyama and Nancy Yoshihara. I initially had concerns about AAJA over the issue of journalists becoming activists, but as the only Asian American in most of the newsrooms I worked in, I saw the need to speak with one greater voice. And I think he got it. Lloyd saw it. And Lloyd has been a loyal member for so long. And Lloyd, I know you're out there. It's great to see you. Let's go on to the next one. And that is from our folks in Seattle, Lori Matsukawa. She tells us that we were small but mighty with talented members from all areas of media. James Satori, Evelyn Iritani, Ron Chu, Ruby DeLuna, Frank Abe, Rob Marr. We grew strong because we reached out to create Northwest Journalists of Color, which has awarded more than $125,000 in scholarships to aspiring students of color over the past 30 years. So Lori, it's great to see you, and congratulations on all the hard work. We really appreciate it. We move on now to Mimi Chan. She was in the nation's capital, and she had this memory. So keep in mind, this is significant because we're no longer West Coast. We are now East Coast. And she writes, I was at USA Today when Bill Singh came around pitching a DC chapter of AAJA. What? There were enough of us to form a group. We happily formed. It was so exhilarating to be in a newsroom with others who looked like me, who understood and faced similar challenges, who shared aspirations to excel in this very good old white boys business. I recall telling folks, we unite today because we need to be a force and to nurture the next generation. That's so, she goes on and on, but Mimi, that's fantastic to hear you say that. And again, this was the beginning of the DC chapter. So that's significant because now AAJE reaches both coasts. As we move on, we head to Sacramento, and Lonnie Wong recalls AAJA's launch there, and special place in my heart for Lonnie. That's where I joined AAJA, and he's still there, hammering away. And Lonnie says, my own hope with AAJA was to create an avenue for local Asian American journalists to get to know each other and connect with one another, not only professionally, but also socially, believing that mutual support and networking could only help with personal goals. Having some fun through organized events wasn't a bad byproduct either, and we had plenty of that over the years. AAJA Sacramento has fulfilled the goals for which it was established. I'm proud to have served as an officer and board member for the past 37 years. Lonnie, thank you for all you've done, and you're so right. AAJA is always a blast when we get together with all our friends. And from Sacramento, we go to New York, in the city that never sleeps. Yes, we made it there and more. Jeannie Park says that as a New York newbie, I literally cold called people with Asian sounding bylines to see if they might be interested in this thing called AAJA, and found that folks were craving community and support. Among our initial members were Helen Zia and Corky Lee. And can you imagine getting to hang out with these legends? Being New Yorkers, we took on a lot of tough issues, but at our chapter's core was deep care and convention karaoke. So that is legendary. That is so good. It's great to hear from the folks in New York, and that's how they got going way back when. And finally, I want you to take a look at this timeline that we're going to pop up on the screen. So it lets it all sink in. Our 20 chapters, they go not only coast to coast, but around the world. We've come a long way in 4 decades from 6 forward thinkers getting together in their homes to discuss what was little more than a great idea to this. So AAJA began to really flourish. I want to get to this line of questioning now with everybody. Bill, what did it take to build AAJA into a national organization? What do you think was the key ingredient there?
Well, first of all, we had to have a strong start in Los Angeles and be able to prove that it could work at a local level and have the right missions and the right structure that would be attractive to everybody else. And the first thing, of course, was the idea that it would be a membership organization where people would connect with each other. And a lot of people who may have felt isolated in their jobs would find connection. We also had to have the kinds of activities that would attract funders. And we also had to make sure that we were supporting students with scholarships. We had to have a mentorship program. We had to have job services. So we had to have the types of things that would be attractive to people in the rest of the country. And then at that point, we thought we could scale it. So we started going out and finding that, in fact, so many people in the rest of the country were so excited about this whole idea. It was just really exhilarating to see so many people get excited about it. And what was cool for me was to see it would be a chance for people to lead, to be able to be in charge of something for themselves and lead other people. And, keep in mind in that period, this was still in the mid 80s, we didn't have the internet really yet. We didn't have social media, a lot of that stuff. So it was a lot more difficult to connect with people than it is, now you have so many tools to connect with people. But back then, we had to send out our newsletters on snail mail. So it was much harder to get names of people and so forth. And if we didn't have a camera available, we couldn't take pictures because we didn't have cell phones to take pictures with.
Wow, those are those things that you forget. Those are all hurdles that you had to get over. Nancy, in your recollection, you're muted, by the way. In your recollection, what were some of the greater accomplishments you had in this kind of secondary phase of AAJA? Your organization is off and running. Other chapters are starting to form. What did you think were the greatest accomplishments and why? And how did you feel about it?
I think among one of the greatest accomplishments of AAJA was its outreach to the community. Aside from the booklet that Frank just mentioned, I think AAJA did a lot to reach out to the communities to help the communities understand how to approach the media. What is a press release? Who do you call? How do you contact people? How do you bring something to the attention? How do you create sort of professional relationships with some of these people so you could just chat with them and drop an idea? I think that was one of the most important things, at least to me, to impart to the community so they could understand the media as we were trying to understand, maneuvering ourselves within and outside that. I just think to create the community of journalists locally and nationally, and now even internationally, I just think that networking was extraordinary. And that, I think, continues to be the strength now, because we'll be facing new challenges, and then with the network bigger and the reporting global, I think that will all benefit, and the different various Asian American Pacific Islander communities as well.
Yeah, great points. Dwight, why and how soon in the development of AAJ was nurturing the next generation one of your priorities, and why was that?
At the beginning, I'll have to admit, I didn't know what the organization would turn into, what it would do, because of it's like a union in a way. And I think some people ran up against that in their newsrooms. What is this? What's going on? Asians having this thing. So it's kind of uncomfortable at times. So in that time, there weren't a lot of people majoring in journalism. Asians. It wasn't a preferred kind of future goal. But what it did was, I think the organization nurtured that. And then you saw more people getting together. They're journalists. They got great jobs. They help society, and it's worthwhile. And you see Asians in many places now. It's not as much as we should have, maybe, and they should have maybe more editorial control and editorial say-so. And we're still running into that problem from time to time, even recently, where editors were telling Asian reporters and Asian editors, do you feel that you can give an objective story on the Atlanta shooting? Because so many Asians died. And how about the anti-Asian violence? Can you cover that fairly? That's been a question that I've heard it's been asked in many major newsrooms. Are you unbiased enough? Can you follow journalistic rules of fairness? And to me, that shows that we've come a long way, but we haven't. Not right now. We're in a crisis period now, and so it'll all come out in the wash. But I don't know if that answers the question, but
no, it's good. It's good. And in fact, I'm going to continue on with it, but we are going to get to today's world in just a second. Frank, though, I like your perspective in what we're talking about right now, because you were really clearly outnumbered in your newsroom. You didn't have the support that some of the other folks they had each other. You did not have that. It sounds like you were kind of on an island. So when it comes to nurturing the next generation, trying to pull people in, why did you think that was super important from what you were seeing in your newsroom?
I think simply because of the amount of work that it needed to be accomplished. And really, when you start with a small group and then you get things going, you realize that you can't do this or shouldn't be doing this, for 40 years or even 10 years, because you have your own career to take care of, you have a family, you have a life. And so you needed to have, in a sense, really fresh blood to keep this energy going, because the need was still there. I mean, the networking and all of that to help support, but also the crises that kept coming up. And I think, we'll get to today, but I know that very specifically when we had the last riot here in LA, and the Korean American community was being just torn apart. And I went to the news director and I said, listen, I've got great sources in the Korean community. Let's put some of these folks on. Let's talk about that perspective, as opposed to just shots of Korean business people standing on the roof, with an M16. Let's talk about some of these underlying issues that drive the anger and all of this behind it. And I went, uh-huh. And of course, that was it. That was the end of that. Mm-hmm. So it's sort of like, okay, then we need to get people in the positions where they can make those kind of decisions. And they do so with fairness, but also with a perspective that says, let's bring in different aspects of the conversation as opposed to one. So really the realization was that we needed to keep this going, and the more folks we have, the better. And then you finally begin to recognize the need that exists in different parts of the country simply because people came together so quickly.
Right. Well, speaking of difficult situations that folks are in, and then you guys in particular, in the early days of AAJ, in fact, you guys, I think, were only established for about a year when Vincent Chin happened. And that was a real difficult story to tell for probably every Asian American journalist across the country. David, if I could start the conversation with you, but I'd love to hear from others too. But when this happened, you guys were in your early stages. What were your thoughts on this terrible story and how it was being covered, and basically the general public's reaction to these two murderers?
Well, in the LA Times back then, I recall there was virtually no coverage of this happening. I mean, there was some, but not to the extent that it should have been. And of course, like a lot of these tragedies, the crime itself was heinous, but then the trials that happened afterward for the two assailants who killed Vincent Chin were never to spend a night in jail for their crime, and they were fined, but they paid very little of those fines, and so there was injustice upon injustice. And I very early on thought that if I, as an Asian American journalist, were to retrace Vincent Chin's steps on that fateful night back in Detroit, that might be somewhat revealing to what actually happened. And like a lot of things, people are very fuzzy about the exact timeline of when the first fight started in the nightclub, and then where Vincent Chin was killed, which is several blocks away, and maybe 20 minutes or 30 minutes after the first fight. These things were not very clear to a lot of people because there's very little coverage of it. And then the ensuing years, when the trials happened, there was some rehashing of these facts, but very little was reported specifically about the timeline and the reason for what really essentially was a hate crime. And so the Vincent Chin episode for me was quite chilling and kind of percolated in the back of my mind all those years. And I think it sort of helped me and inspired me because even though the editor I pitched this story to, I mean, who knew that there was even a new journalism at that point in time, but that would have been it, a first-person account of following the footsteps of Vincent Chin. But that editor turned me down, but maybe he saw something in me and became my mentor. And for the next few years then, I benefited from his advice and counsel, and eventually got what I really wanted to get, which was stepping up the ladder and coming off the copy desk, which is very unheralded and, of course, no recognition, and becoming a content editor. And so I was getting some benefit from at least trying to get the coverage shifted in a direction. And I think for me, the fulfillment of all this was the reparations of for Japanese Americans sent to the internment camps. This was probably about 5 years later, 1987, when the hearings were held in Los Angeles. I went to the op-ed section and said, we need to do a piece on the reparations, and I think I'd be very qualified to do it because I was born in Heart Mountain. And they said, okay. And I really didn't even know what my position was going to be because like all Japanese Americans, I'd been raised that you just endured. And then hopefully years later, you might prevail some way. But I wrote a piece that came out in favor of reparations. And in 1988, that bill got passed. And so you win some and you lose some when you make story pitches. And sometimes when you win big.
Right. Well put. Bill, we saw Vincent Chin in the 80s. David just talked about reparations or redress for Japanese Americans. There's that horrible Stockton school shooting that happened in 1989. When all these things occurred, this is all in those foundational years of AAJA. What did that teach you about what you're doing and the path that you were on?
Well, first of all, on Vincent Chin, the person we all should hang our hats, that we should salute for that, is Helen Zia. And Helen was the person that really took the ball and ran with that. And, you know, initially there was not a lot of coverage of the Vincent Chin case, but then when the verdicts came down, that's when people started paying more attention to it. And that's when Helen Zia rose to the occasion. If you really want to learn more about what actually happened, you should read her book, Asian American Dreams. She has quite a bit of discussion on what happened in that case. And my hat's out to Helen Zia on that. So I'm sorry, your question was, what does it teach us about?
Well, I guess my point being, you have already established you're in your early years, and all of these kind of Asian-centric stories are happening. So what did that tell you in the path that you were on when it comes to properly representing Asian journalists?
Well, it was clear that having more Asian Pacifics in the newsrooms would certainly help. But we couldn't, you know, we shouldn't rely on the Asian Pacifics alone to cover the stories. We had to make sure that there was enough people devoted to doing these things that weren't necessarily Asian Pacific. And I think it was really important to have started then developed and to have developed the watchdog part of the organization. And John Fudubiki did a great job in his Project Zinger and really pointing out some of the things that were happening with coverage of Asian Americans. And that was, I think, a huge stepping stone for having AAJ do more as a watchdog in looking for areas where Asian Pacific issues either weren't being covered or were being stereotyped or unfairly covered.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I want to bring this into partners and allies, our next section, and we have a couple of more full screens for you. But for many of us, you may have heard the adage that knowing us by the company we keep. Well, AAJA's founders, they started us on a path, and the chapter and the organization long have sought to be model partners and great citizens in our business and our communities. So what we've done is we've accumulated a host of statements from outside entities. So here's what the Japanese American National Museum observed of this history, and I'll try to keep this as brief as possible. But Chris Gomai says, in the earliest days of JANM, it was challenging to get the news media to pay attention to our exhibitions, programs, and events. Often it was the Asian American journalists who would push the significance of stories about our community. That's a very important point and one of the key roles that AAJA has played. So let's move on now to our colleagues, the California Chicano News Media Association. They had this to say from Frank Sotomayor, and Frank says AAJA was fortunate to have an all-star team of journalists with vision and dedication to effectively establish the organization. We at CCNMA marveled at how quickly AAJA took flight and soared. It was always good to collaborate with Bill, Nancy, and David at the Times. That's from Frank Sotomayor. And then we have these kind and sage thoughts from the Asian Americans Advancing Justice Los Angeles and the wonderful Stuart Kuo. And he said basically AAJA has been a crucial partner in our development and advocacy since our inception in 1983. So they started just a couple of years later. AAJA members have been wonderful contributors in being present as MCs at our dinners, but the coverage, training, sharing of ideas by AAJA members to me and the staff of Asian Americans Advancing Justice has been a key part of our growth in reaching all of our communities. And we also are grateful that the Society of Professional Journalists, the Greater Los Angeles chapter, they co-sponsored today's program, and they have worked with us for so long. This is from Ashanti Blaze Hopkins, and she says, now more than ever, it is so important to have organizations like AAJA advocating for all journalists and newsrooms across the country, but specifically journalists who identify as APIDA. 40 years is such an amazing milestone that we at SPGA LA are proud to celebrate, and we continue to support AJA's unwavering mission. Here's to another 40 years. Wonderful there. We got a boost at our start and have saluted our friends at Visual Communications. This is from Dwayne Kubo. He says, congratulations to AJA. It's great to know early AJA was inspired by VC, and these things really do get passed from one generation to the next. I was personally moved and inspired by the venerable Ellen Endo and the late, great Harry Honda. VC was fortunate to have offices in the Sun Building in LA in the early 70s, along with Pacific Citizen. That from Dorian Kubo. And then let's move on to, we not only share a common commitment to storytelling and words with our friends at East West Players, we can never forget our forever bond through an early AAJA leader and one of the theater company's founders, and that is the late, great Yet Locke. He has been mentioned here, but it can't be said enough. Yet Locke was so valuable to AAJA. And Tim Dong, he's artistic emeritus of East West Players, and he says, congratulations to AAJA. AAJA and East West Players are in the best business of telling stories. May we continue our long-standing collaboration, continue to celebrate a community, and raise the visibility of the many achievements, one story at a time. Now more than ever, our stories must educate, enlighten, and empower. Well said from Tim Dong. AAJA is grateful to our partners and allies over the years, and we hope that this is a powerful sampling of the many individuals and institutions, and we thank and look forward to doing more in the future. The founders ensure that our industry and community roots indeed have grown deep and strong. So that's great to point out that it's partnerships that make this organization that much more powerful. Nancy, AAJ, was inspired by groups like NABJ, CCNMA. How did those groups work together in those early years with you guys and helping you establish who you eventually became to be?
As I recall, they were wonderful networking to network among them, and we were all sort of experiencing dealing with similar issues, all on parallel tracks and differences in experience. Also, we would share job fairs and resources, and it made all the difference in the world. And we learned a lot from these other organizations. We did quick studies, and I think we did well because they set a precedent in a lot of these areas. What the content may have been unique to us, but how and the process was very similar. So they were great friends. They still are, and I really miss all those journalists again.
Yeah, I'm sure everybody can understand that. And I'd love to pop up another photo as they get that ready to bring out. In this phase, when you are growing, and you're growing quite quickly, how did AAJA start to evolve and maybe even change when it comes to direction on where you wanted to bring AAJA and what it stands for? Frank, I'll let you jump in on that one. When it comes to, you're established now, you're a few years old, you're building members, you're global now. How did you see this evolution back then?
Well, I think it was one part gratification that, this was continuing to grow. And the other part was simply amazement that it continued to grow because, it's sort of like, it's a call here, a phone call here, a workshop here, this kind of thing. And all of a sudden you have a chapter. Bill did an incredible job in terms of going around talking to folks, and that kind of quote networking, I think, really built things. And again, it was a bit surprising how quickly it sort of came together, how we got a lot of folks together in different parts of the country. And as Bill said, it was a remarkable achievement. I'm not sure you just said it now, but the fact that when we began to have chapters on the East Coast, it became truly, then you felt you were really national. And the one thing, the West Coast was fine, but to actually get across the country, I think that's the thing that added more motivation that says we can do this in a lot of different places. So it kept us going in terms of the organizing effort, simply seeing how gratifying it was to see these chapters pop up. So it just kind of kept going and it kept going. And it became a management issue in terms of, having to have sufficient staff to make sure that we could deliver on all the things that we were talking about. And it wasn't something where you could just rely on strictly a volunteer effort. It was too much work to keep it all going all up in the air. So I think, it just was incremental steps where we looked at it and said, we need to really look at how we can adequately support the organization and keep it going.
I'd love to pop up that photo or the next photo. Here we go. And I think this is particularly relevant because Jennifer Kwong just wrote something in the chat saying, glad some of us still get together, go AAJA moms. And so let's see, Nancy, can you explain what that means and what we see in this?
Well, I'm not a mom, so I wasn't part of the circuit, so I'm not sure I'm the best person to illuminate that.
Bill, you want to jump in on that? I think, Bill, you know something about this, right?
On the upper right is from a softball game between AAJA and CCNMA. I'm pretty sure that because I see Frank Sotomayor in there. I see some other CCNMA people in there. And that was one of the fun things we were doing. Actually, David and I, we organized a couple of AAJA tennis tournaments too. I don't know if you remember that.
I remember that.
And that was a lot of fun too. So, it wasn't all work. There was a lot of fun. There's a lot of communion between different groups. And by the way, in the group you have not mentioned that was important for us to ally with was a group, the Black Journalists Association of Southern California. They were really the group that we connected with the most here. And, a lot of those people were our colleagues in the newsroom. So yeah, there was a lot of fun stuff that was going, a lot of connection among people. And
while we're looking at photos, do you have another one loaded? We'd love to check that out. We're running out of time, and I eventually want to open this up to our audience questions as well. But if we have another photo, go ahead and take it. In the meantime, as we bring in Dwight, I want to kind of bring our conversation into today. And you put it out there, you don't hold back. What's the good, the bad of today? How much has our world changed? What should AAJA be doing as we head into the future, especially in these really difficult times?
Wow, what a question. Gee, we went through 4 years recently of a unusual phenomenon in our lifetimes, and that was Donald Trump. It's unbelievable now we have a more conventional president, but thinking back at Trump, I was wondering, some people blame the press for his election and for his popularity and for his sustaining that popularity. They feel that we're not tough enough on him. Or we put too much fluff stories about him and his family out there, almost humanizing them. So think about that as important nowadays to maybe pioneer or take little baby steps into a new journalism, not the stuff that we were taught in the movies about journalism, like, we must be completely objective in writing this story. We must balance. We must go for balance. Seems like now we're on a slippery slope to somewhere that may not be too good for us. So that's somewhere I think everybody should take a warning from, just what's going on around us right now.
Right. I throw the same question to you, David. What do you think, and this is a tough one, but I mean, we can handle it. We're journalists. What should we be doing today in this current climate when it comes to AAJA? You're muted, by the way.
Yeah, that is a tough question. It goes way back to actually the origins of AAJA, because that reception that Frank was talking about, where we were trying to gauge the interest level in the formation of something called AAJA. We didn't know how many people would even show up. And I recall that Dwight took the opportunity to do what Dwight always want to do, and that is become an activist. And so he was circulating a petition at that reception, and the petition had to do with some despot in maybe the Far East who was persecuting journalists. And I remember grabbing Dwight by the arm and taking him into the hallway and saying that, well, you know, at a reception like this, where we're just trying to get people to socialize, being political like this so quickly is not going to make it easy to recruit people, because we wanted to stress the professionalism at the start. Well, you know, Dwight was actually right in long term that this has to be one of the main points of AAJ today, because they have so much of a far-flung membership, to strengthen those numbers now, and that more needs to be done. And it's not just the straight recitation of every single hate crime, for instance, against Asian Americans. It has to be holding the politicians and law enforcement to account on what they are or aren't doing, for that matter. And the politics of everything now, maybe we can focus more on that area, and let the issues of hiring and promotion and those others take a secondary position now to where we would like to be, envisioning the future for AAJA.
I
So
think,
hopefully that will happen.
Go right ahead, Nancy.
I think one of the challenges for AAJ was back a few years ago and continues, is to really begin to move the journalists up the rank. I think we sort of top out at certain areas, but I think to be able to be an editor of a major metropolitan paper, I think to be able to be, you know, there are producers and everything, but be at that top level where you kind of can call the shots and what have you, that based on your experience as a journalist, your credentials, your track record, everything takes you to a point where your influence is beyond a story, beyond a segment, beyond a, you know, into sort of the stratosphere of what journalism is all about. And I think that ELP and these programs have been good. And I think the fact that, you know, there have been pauses with the 2008, you know, all the newspapers contracting and continue to contract. And I think now with COVID, everybody's kind of having to hunker down and do a different kind of journalism. But I think that continues to be a challenge. I mean, can we own something? Can we, you know, be the defining factors of you know, in a bigger scheme? I think I think that's one of the challenges and growth areas for AAJA.
Right, let's get to the top of the mountain. You know, I'm starting to bring in some questions from our audience as well, because we've basically run out of time. We're going to go a little bit over because we started a little bit late. But Bill, I'm going to throw you a question for Randall Yip, which is along these lines anyway. And Randall, he and I go way back. I met Randall when we were members way back in Sacramento almost 30 years ago. So good to see you, Randall. So Randall says, seeing AAJA 40 years later, what are you most proud of about AAJA, and what do you think we need to strengthen? So similar lines, but I want to hear a little bit more of your own personal thoughts about what are you most proud of with AAJA?
Well, as I said in my opening, I'm just proud of the fact that it's gone on for 40 years. A lot of organizations don't get that far. And part of the reason why it's gone on so long is because people really find connection. People really find, you know, their best friends, people they can network with. And that's just huge. As far as for the future, I've actually given it quite a bit of thought. And I think AAJ, it's almost imperative that it goes to the next level and takes advantage of all the things that we didn't have when we started. We didn't have 1,700 members. We didn't have social media. We didn't have the respect in the industry. I've put together actually a kind of a proposal, which
Really?
actually right now is about 20 pages long, that calls on AAJ and journalism to kind of be reinvented, to be much more proactive in addressing problems in society. I think a lot of the problems in society come from the fact that journalists and the government and businesses tend to focus more on the symptoms of problems rather than the causes and solutions of problems. And so as a result, you end up not really making a lot of progress, and a lot of problems persist. So I actually put together a kind of a scenario under which I call AAJ 2.0, in which AAJ would be the catalyst for reimagining the use of journalism to be more proactive in solving problems in society, such as racism, such as economic inequality, such as climate change, such as immigration. And it would take, I think it's almost necessary, because I think there's so much happening with changes in technology that, technology is disrupting entire industries. And I think it's going to be disrupting journalism too. And if you're not, innovating and going to the next level, you're going to be marginalized out, like a lot of other, like Blockbuster was when Netflix comes along. You're going to have to reinvent yourselves and come up with new ways of approaching things. So the proposal I have is being read by a few people right now. So I don't think I want to go into great detail because I need some more feedback. But anyway, I thought a lot about it, because if I was starting over now, that's kind of how I would think about it. It doesn't replace what AAJ is doing now. It just adds another dimension. And I think cause and solution journalism is really what we did when we started AAJ. We saw problems, we looked at what the causes were, and we looked for what the solutions would be.
Mm-hmm. That's great. I would love to see that. I mean, we all are so curious, and we would all love to eventually see that when it's ready to go.
Yeah. And one thing I would like to add too, I think in the issue of anti-Asian hate, I would like to see AAJA take the narrative, because I think the problem, these things are going to happen again, unless the narrative is changed about the role of Asians and Asian Pacifics in U.S. society. I would like to see, for example, we don't like the model minority myth. We know that it's detrimental. We know it's not true. So, and we know that it was imposed upon us by other people. So let's come up with our own name. Let's not let other people define us. And for my 2 cents, one name I thought would be good is Essential Americans. People who, if you're in this country seeking the American dream, if you're in this country seeking to right the wrongs of seeking for racial equality, for justice, then you're an essential American. If you were one of the doctors who serviced people during COVID, if you're one of the nurses, Filipino nurses by far took the heaviest brunt of paying the ultimate price with their lives in servicing COVID. And if you're in those groups, if you're among the people who are on the front lines of finding vaccines, who are on the front lines of looking for new scientific advances, or if you're someone who's just struggling to make a living, at the minimum wage, which, we have a lot of Asian Pacifics who are undocumented immigrants. If you're in those, but if your goal is to seek a better life in this country, you're an essential American. So maybe that's just my idea. I would love to see people batter on ideas for what we want to call ourselves, so we don't have this model minority crap going on anymore. Let's come up with something better.
Right. That's great. And love your words. That's well thought out. And I think that really speaks to a lot of people out there. Thank you for that. Now, I want to read a question here from Michelle Lee. She's our president. And she says, I hear that many members of AAJA and the AAPI community, I hear from them about the persistent feeling of invisibility, even now in 2021. What contributes to this feeling, and what more should we be doing as AAJA so that we can help our journalists and our community be more seen by the broader public and the country? It's a great question. It's a tough question. Frank, I haven't heard from you from a little while. Do you want to try to grab that one?
Well, this is a very historic kind of an issue when it comes to that. I mean, today in the Times today, there was this thing about the Theater Alliance, and this actress who said, she was, first of all, her name was mispronounced, and then when they put her picture up, they put up another Asian woman.
Yeah.
Like, so I guess we all look alike, right? So there you go. So I think, kind of what Bill was saying in the sense of maybe it's more activism on the part of AAJA that says we need to engage on this issue, because this is really the highest profile this has had in as far as I can remember, in a very long time. So in a sense, let us seize the moment and move on this, because it's going to come back to us. I mean, how many of us were told, as I have many times over the years, you speak English so well. Well, okay, fine. It's because I grew up in South Central. I grew up in Watts. I've been through Riot. But here's the thing. If we need to be able to focus on this and say, let's take some leadership on this. Let's step out. It is, in a sense, a little bit dangerous, but there is risk. And with that, I think, is something that we need to do to better engage and to really take our place in terms of making sure that this happens. And that includes our own newsrooms, our own workplaces, where you get these kind of weird questions. Says, can you cover it fairly? Now, whoever gets asked that, if you're, let's just say, a white reporter, does somebody ask that of you? It says, excuse me, because this is a white on white crime. Do you think you can be balanced when you talk about that? Where does that come from? So there's a strong need for an educational effort in that respect that says, lead the way and say, who are we? How long have we been here? We've been here since, well, forever, truly, and help build this country. So let's take that on, and let's begin to maybe engage with management and with ownership. And it says, what, where are you on this issue? Because you need to be with us.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're running out of time quickly, but I wanted to basically give everybody an opportunity to get some final words. I know we're kind of getting to that conclusion anyway, but there's so many more things to ask, and we have so many questions coming down from all these wonderful journalists out there. And Nancy, if I could I begin with you on, could I
Yes.
get some thoughts? I know that your mind is always spinning. You had so much you want to contribute. Tell us what you're thinking when it comes to us bringing this community, AAJA, into the future, and perhaps a look back on how you feel about everything.
To follow on what Frank was saying in Bill's AAJA 2.0, I think, and this idea of self-generation for the Asia Pacific communities, I think we need to develop a network of voices that are activists and scholars, et cetera, and begin having them write really thoughtful, like op-ed types of pieces and whatever that begin to sort of filter out in a different, it's on the journalism pages, et cetera, but it's just a different way of looking at things and people reading it and people, incorporating. I think that should be part of this rethinking of AAJ 2.0 and where we go next. That have we adequately built the bridges with the current group of activists and thinkers and movers and shakers of thought about Asian Americans and help to amplify those ideas? Because when earlier you talked, there was mention of Yuji Ishioka and the first to coin the term Asian Americans. I would be fascinated to see what the current idea of Asian American is, the contemporary concept of that. Because there was a New York Times article, I think by Brian Chen, 2 or 3 weeks ago, where he says that it's the first, he mentions that now, what is it to be Asian American? And, there's so many different faces of that. And yet, does media pick that up? Or more importantly, do we self-define that? That's where I think I would be interested in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Dwight, how about you? Some final words on what you'd like to leave our viewers with?
Yeah, I think these are really good ideas, and these are smart people on this panel that are thinking ahead, thinking to the future, and they've been thinking about it for a little while now. But what I see coming up is with this tendency now toward flat out racism.
Yep.
I think it paints the whole scenario over with their effect. Uh, it's a new ball game completely, and sometimes the most logical thinking, um, the you know the genteel kinds of approaches are fine for one level, but in the face of what we're looking at now, and it doesn't seem to be getting any better, and it could get way worse, that we've got to think about some kinds of unconventional means as well, as well as the common kinds of remedies, even the most well thought out remedies. You know, um, they may not work in the face of all this racism that's coming out.
Yeah. And that's interesting that you say it could get worse, because last year we saw the initial Asian hate, thinking it couldn't get worse than that. And this year it certainly has been worse. And if tensions continue to rise with China, you know, we all
Yeah,
see how that's played out in the
that's the
future.
playbook right
I
now.
mean, in the past, it's
The
played out.
target is China,
Mhm,
right?
mhm,
For how long?
Yeah.
20 years more?
Yeah, it could get far worse. So,
Yes.
David, what about you? Some final words from you.
Well, I was just so happy and pleased that I was able to contribute so long ago. And to me, it's been a total butterfly effect where you flap your wings over here and you do a little thing, and lo and behold, 40 years later, look what became of it. It's like being a parent where your child just exceeds your total dreams or what you expected. And I think that it's very hard to predict what's going to happen in the future because you never know. But what you do is you do the little things now that hopefully will turn into something very, very good for you and good for your community.
Well, that's beautiful. So well said. Frank, how about you? Some final words?
You know what, I kind of said it before, but essentially, you know what, some things change and some things don't change, and some things change very slowly. And I think the challenge for all of us is just to continue to work on making the change happen. And it is hard work, and it's going to take some persistence. But that's something I think that, you know, all the folks on this call, all these journalists, you know, we all work hard. We all, we really want to get that story, but this is the kind of thing that benefits us all. So really the challenge here is to keep at it. Just keep.
Okay. Thank you, Frank. And then finally, Bill, final words from you.
Okay, well, I get to show off what I'm wearing.
Oh,
You
you
see
went
it?
away. It's keying out. Dare, mighty. Oh my God, it's keying out, Bill.
You have to read it to us, Bill.
It says, "Dare mighty things."
Ah, nice.
So
Okay.
think big. I'm sorry, you can't see it. There
There you go.
There you go. There
Dare
you go.
mighty things. All right.
Think
Excellent.
big, question everything.
I have a Lincoln Project t-shirt on.
Think big, question everything. The sky's the limit. You can do whatever you want. Just be creative. Go for it. You know, the world. You could change the world. You know, AAJ has the ability as a unified group, and if you all work together, you could change the world. You know, you could do far more than we dreamed of doing 40 years ago. You have the power to do this, and if you use it in the right ways, and you collaborate and you allyship with other groups, you could solve a lot of problems. You can make journalism, you know, so well respected, and as a leader in making the world better. And it's all possible, and I think you should go for it. You know, there's so many things you could do that you could just totally transform journalism and make it a powerful force for change in society, for good change, and solve a lot of problems, including racism.
Yeah,
Bringing
that's
people together.
so well put, because journalism is in crisis, as we saw from the last administration, where everything we say is put into doubt, which is really sad considering how hard people work to be honest and objective. So let me say thank you all for being here today. Thank you for what you did 40 years ago. Thanks for this evening and inspiring the young and old alike who have been watching here today. And I hope you'll remain available as folks want to continue to pick your brain throughout the years. And by the way, we do have a couple of quick announcements in light of this being our 40th anniversary. We call it 40 for 40. First of all, yes, thank you to our board members. Thank you so much who have done some hard work to get this event going. There's a lot of their photos of the folks that have been working diligently to get this done. And then we have something called 40 for 40 gift memberships, where you planted the journalism seeds 40 years ago, and today we in the Los Angeles chapter will carry your mission forward by gifting 40 AAJA-LA memberships to journalists of all backgrounds and at all levels, from students and those who are mid-career to veterans and retirees. These are people with the talent and the innovation to invigorate our group in practicing their craft, in outreach, in mentoring. This gift will be activated and offered by members of our board and significant supporters for 40 years, 40 for 40. Also, become a member now. 40 is just to start. We'll be launching a vigorous membership drive to help raise our activism and our visibility. We'll share exciting details soon. Invite all of you to join us at aaja.org. And now we want to say congratulations on your successful virtual reunion. Thanks to our many volunteers who worked to make this happen. And
Thank
finally,
you.
we thank you guys, Nancy, Dwight, Frank, David, Bill, Tricia, you're out there somewhere. We love you, Tricia. Thank you for all you've done for us. We'd love to see you again soon. And everybody out there, you know how important Trivia Bowl is to us here at AAJA-LA. So Trivia Bowl, mark your calendars. It's October 15th. It's going to be virtual again. And I'll tell you, one byproduct of this virtual Trivia Bowl that we found out last year was that people all over the world can participate, and they certainly did. We had such a great time, so we're going to do it again this year, Friday, October 15th at 7 p.m. Save that date. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, AAJA-LA. Thank you, founders. Someday, we'll be able to do this in real life, and I can't wait for that. We'll see you all.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye. Good to
Bye.
see all of you.
Same
Good to
here.
see
Thank
ya.
you to everybody.
And all
Everybody-
the folks in the chat, all the old timers out there, we've been noticing you. Tiwa, good to see you. Randall, Jita Kim, all you guys, good to see you.